Hey everybody! So I am back today for a bit of a briefer Heresy Hump Day this week, but it's going to be an Age of Sigmar special. I think it's sort of appropriate because the game is coming out with its second General's Handbook. I've been priming to play for a year now. As you know, I just kind of got a big portion of my forces finished with my goblins, and I had my first game, so I'm going to talk about that today. I think it's kind of fitting for me because so much has happened in the last year with Age of Sigmar, so much opinions on it, such a big game change whether you like it or not, and then even really a lot of influence on the game of Warhammer 40k as well. So I'm not going to do a table update today. For those of you that have tuned in last week, because I've worked the weekend, just various things, I'm just kind of getting on and working hard on my Flemish mercenaries at the moment, and I've gotten a lot of good progress, but I'll do maybe a table update later in the week. But I, of course, have to have a sponsored alcoholic product for this evening's chat. And so what I have today is Yukon Brewing's Yukon Red. This is made out of Whitehorse, Yukon, Canada at 5.5% alcohol. They don't give a description of the beer. I've had it before. Despite the fact that it's called Yukon Red, it is specifically stated as an amber ale, and it's a refreshing, nice beer. Wouldn't say it's one of my favorites, but it has a bit of a molasses taste, and I find that the more I've been drinking very hoppy kind of beers, I kind of am not into as much the molasses taste, although I do kind of like it in a porter. So yeah, not the end of the world. It's still a nice beer, and I really do like the company. They do make good beers. This style may not be my favorite, but it is the one that is sponsoring this chat for this evening. I've written a little list here of topics because I do have some thoughts. Besides a little bit of an introduction to my thoughts on the topic of Age of Sigmar, I am going to focus on my game that I had specifically and what I feel like I kind of got from it as far as highlights, like high points. Sorry, still have that cough from last week too. I just kind of choked it back there. But as well, a couple of things that I thought about for the goblins in particular that I took away from it. Now, I guess it's been a huge controversy last year. I think there are still people that are mad about the changes that happened with Warhammer Fantasy. At the end of the day, I think most people will... I think that the results have shown, financially that the game is done pretty well and that it's been a success for GW. Whether they should have canceled one to do the other is a matter of opinion. I've not played the old Warhammer Fantasy game. I am planning on playing it with these goblins. That's why I do everything whenever I can on square bases. Which that brings me to another thought that I'll bring up that I didn't plan on talking about. I think that it has been successful, and so much so that a lot of concepts from Age of Sigmar have been kind of shuttled over and ported over to Warhammer 40k 8th edition, as I understand it. So now we're coming into the second General's Handbook. I avoided buying the first because that was going to be a bit of a gift to myself for completing my goblins, and even though I'm kind of close to completing my core units, I really just have my nasty skulkers here that would complete what I set out to do for the Gitmob battalion regiment. I held off, and now I think I'm just going to hold off another couple of weeks or a week until the next General Handbook comes out, and I will get it. I had a really, really enjoyable game. Now, part of that is coming from, I wanted to play a Goblin Horde. Given that Age of Sigmar initially was supposed to be a bit of a smaller skirmish kind of game, I wasn't really sure what a Horde would kind of feel like, how doable it would be. I really felt, I ended up playing Ogres, and so I don't know the factions really well yet, but I played standard ogres. I'll throw up some pictures while we're talking. I didn't play like the Beast Claw ones with the big riding beasts, although I suppose just like with the other destruction units you can mix and match, and so I'm not sure where one ends and one begins. We both had giants to support each of our armies, so a giant on each side, and I had trolls, and he had some champion kind of units within his ogres. It was interesting, and I really, knowing that I was going against ogres, and knowing that I didn't have enough models to do the Git mob, with my nasty skulkers where you get extra rules, I really felt I'm likely going to get smashed. But the purpose of the game, I was happy to go over there and get smashed if that's what was going to happen, because the purpose of the game was to get introduced to the game. My opponent is a gentleman player, a casual player, very much like me, was not there to stomp me into the ground in my first game. It was there really to teach me the game. But at the same time, I think we both still, in order to learn the game and have fun, tried to still, maximize our units and win. But just in a really casual environment. Now, he even said before the game, he said, you may be surprised as to how well your goblins do, is what he had said. And, I just thought, okay, we'll see. And so he lent me some trolls to bring me up to 1,500 points. It was a 1,500 point game, and I used and proxied my giant, which was smaller than the GW giant that he had on the table model-wise, but, we just kind of went with it. So, I would say, I'll talk about the results first. It ended up being a 5-round game, I believe, and we kind of called it like right close to the very end. We played a game where you do capture objectives, so there were 3 objectives on the table, and you play diagonally. I ended up winning the game, and I was quite surprised. A lot of it was because it was objectives. My goblins were really able to go in there and be tar pits in a lot of ways, and he was just raking through goblins. I used all of my ability as far as like warlord abilities and like warlocks, shaman spells, and everything that I could that would buff my army's ability to either hit or cause a wound or to do something like that. That's what I did, because I recognized that they were goblins, and they hit on 5s and wound on 5s, and so I tried to do everything I could to lower that throughout the game. They slowly took ogres off the line each round, slowly chipped away at them. Ogres swathed through lines of goblins, but I took a unit of 30 to 40 goblins as one unit. One big unit of goblins. I took, I believe, two 10 groups of wolves and a 5 group of wolves. One 10-man group, 10 goblin group was spear and shield, and the others, I believe, the other 10 were archers, and then the other 5, I think, were spear and shield, if I remember correct. I learned that the wolves, against really tough things like ogres, the wolf riders are good because they ride on wolves. The wolves are actually better than the goblins. And so when the wolves got in there, they are actually pretty decent. And so having a group of 10 wolves kind of with goblin, spear, and shield was pretty good. But even the archers was actually pretty good once the wolves got in. That helped. That tar pit of 30 to 40 goblins was exactly that. Like, it resisted round after round the main line, the main battle group of ogres. No, it was interesting, and I was able to take a lot of the objectives in the beginning of the game through the midpoint of the game. As the game went on, my opponent really decimated towards the end of the game my main group of goblins. But at that point, the game had been going on for quite a while, and I'd been capturing lots of objectives. The giants were really, really powerful. We played a game where you have a certain amount of units that start in the first round, and then you have another group that come in the second, and another number that come in the third. I believe his giant came in the second round, and mine came in the third. And so his giant was slightly softened up or committed to a position, and in the third round, my giant came in and killed him with one round of combat. And so that was lucky with dice rolling and things. I felt the flow of the game I really liked, in that it was a bit of a nail-biter in the sense that initiative each round is random. And so you can end up either going twice in a row, like you could finish a round and then go as the first person the next round and receive all the benefits of starting a new round. Or you can actually have the opposite, where you haven't gone for 2 rounds and you've taken 2 rounds of damage. Having said that, because in Melee both sides go each time, it's a really interesting dynamic. I liked the flow of the game. It felt fast in some ways, even though we took a long time because I was new and we were explaining everything, and I was moving around a horde of goblins as well. But the flow went really well. I enjoyed it. I liked sort of the interesting mechanic of the random initiative order. One of the things that I was impressed with is I felt, compared to other GW games I play, and like having played 40k in the past, maybe this is just because we played Destruction versus Destruction and it was Goblins versus Ogres. I could be wrong, but when you have like Trolls on the table and Giants and really powerful characters that were Ogres and Goblins and all these things, there were many times that like really powerful characters missed, and it just a weaker character survived the round, where I would have just assumed that they'd be automatically gone given their point value difference or their stature difference in the game. And there were just many times where units were able to hang in there with tougher units, and I felt like perhaps I don't know the best way to explain this, but if you have like your most powerful unit here, or your least powerful unit here and your most powerful unit here, in one game of, like, let's say Warhammer 40k 6th edition, I'm just going to say like a while ago because I haven't been playing 8, there were times when I just felt like you'd have like the most powerful unit could just squash, like, just this unit would have no chance at all against this one, or vice versa, whichever I said was the strongest now. I'm looking at the camera screen and I'm getting mixed up. But either way, one unit was so far apart that the other one really was just useless, in the game versus it. In Age of Sigmar, I kind of felt like they kind of went like to here or something, and at times, like, units that I thought wouldn't be able to perform very well, like, could, like, hold their own and even cause wounds and cause trouble and things. And then units that I would have thought would have just automatically destroyed the other one would miss, or, it would just still, actually, there was, like, a tension within the game. And I really liked that. Maybe it was just the game I played. I can't really call the whole system on one game, but that's the way I felt. At the same time, like, magic in the game, it felt fairly balanced in the sense that, sometimes things go off and sometimes they don't. You can't really depend on it. It adds a little bit of a buffer, but not always a tremendous one. And then also your opponent, as long as they have another type of wizard or shaman on their side, they have the chance to compete with you quickly and cancel it. It seemed a lot easier than, let's say, the Psychics phase in 7th edition of Warhammer 40k, which really was quite an exercise. This went really fast, and so I did like that. For the feeling of a bit of a quick game, you have a few options that you can choose. I think I had 3 options, I believe, to choose from as far as spells to use. And so that was good. It was sort of like the 2 that were general, and then the 1 that came with my Goblin Shaman. And so that was actually good. Just a little bit of variety. Not a tremendous amount. Like, one of the things, in all fairness, that I liked about, let's say, 7th, 6th edition 40k which is like my Games Workshop big comparator, is that if you were really in it for the narrative aspect of the game, you had like a number of schools of like psychic powers you could choose from, and you could really craft like a librarian or an Eldar Farseer to the kind of individual you wanted them to be. Hang on a second. Sorry about that, everybody. Just had a phone call. So, yeah, so you could really craft that individual to the way you want them to be very thematic. Like, you know, I mean, if you wanted, just to make this up because it's been a while, but if you wanted somebody that could just unleash like telekinetic energy and was just very explosive in their sort of librarian and their discipline and letting out the emotion, you know, you could create that and choose those psychic powers, or a school that allows you that. If you wanted one that was a bit more deceptive, you know, like then they had ones that had mind control and like all kinds of things like that. And it was just, I always thought that was a bonus for the breadth of the 40k universe. And I assume that there's a bit of that in the old Warhammer Fantasy too, just because it's the same company. I could be wrong, but I would assume that some of that crosses over back and forth, and that could be a bonus for the older system. The other thing that was interesting was Battle Shock, which I think also balances things a bit. Now, I did use a lot of my abilities, as I said, in the game, like the general's abilities, to try to maximize my troops. So there were like troop supportive abilities is what I chose for everything. And, you know, there was one ability that is the standard one. I used to remember the name while I was playing it. I've already forgotten it. But it allows you to your unit you select to be immune to Battle Shock. Battle Shock is something, for those of you that don't play, that essentially the amount of characters that you lose from a unit or troops, you roll a die and you have like, you know, a bravery statistic, and you minus off from that, you know, the amount of characters you've lost, and you have to make a roll and succeed, or otherwise you lose a number of units. That's the difference of men. And it's actually a pretty good system. Now, you'd think that I'd dislike it because I played a Horde army, and playing like a Horde army with lower bravery, you lose lots of guys. Like, there were times when I've lost 5 or 6 just to the 7, just to the Battle Shock, you know, out of my big unit. And there were times when I lost a lot less. It just depends on how you roll. That is the price in having a huge unit. And, you know, I think that it's a good balancing factor, even though I was the one that suffered from it more, because he had higher bravery units with less men. It made sense that we wouldn't be losing the same amount, you know, and that I would have many that would be running away from these ogres. And so it adds to it, and it's a balancing factor for the game that I also liked. And so, really, I don't have too much that I disliked about it. I actually quite liked it. The feel for it for me was very much like a fast play fantasy game, and it was fun. I mean, it's a fun game. Maybe I do like games as well across genres that are perhaps more complex and detailed. You know, not for the sake of just being complex and detailed, but just to be a bit more cerebral in the way you create your characters and some of the things that happen. But, you know, there's a place for everything. And this game, I think, with what it achieves to do, was a really fun game. It surprised me, you know, as to how well my army did, you know, the first time going out with it, and just being capable of doing something with it. An old army, the Git Mob Grots, I call them goblins, but I know they're Grots in Age of Sigmar now, but they're not really a well-supported faction in the sense of models and, you know, releases and fluff and things like that. Like, they've not chosen them in the way they've chosen some of the Oryx and other things. So that's why I was a little skeptical, you know, but no, I think it's fair game. I mean, I think you can likely play with a number of factions regardless of how much they've added to them, and still potentially do relatively well, which is fun. So, I'm not. I told you this one's not going to go very long, but my closing section is just my sort of thoughts on the goblins themselves, or the grots. Git mob. One of the things that I took away from it, because I asked my opponent if he thought I could do anything a little bit differently, and he had said, well, you won, and so it seemed to work really well, so I wouldn't, I don't think there's anything obvious off the bat that you need to do differently, but I was thinking about it, and despite the fact that I threw most of my generals, excuse me, most of my generals' traits and sort of command abilities into improving the regular goblins in most cases, it may have increased a little bit the number of ogres that I killed, but not much, in my opinion. It's my opinion from thinking about the game. I almost wondered whether I need to think less about trying to make the tar pit goblins more killy and just embrace the fact that they're the tar pit and try to look for other abilities to enhance other things. And my opponent mentioned the anvil and the hammer sort of idea, and clearly the goblins are the anvil, and in this case the giant was the hammer. The wolves in some cases were the hammer too in my game, but I wonder about that. I have to actually learn the abilities more that I can use with the general, and determine how many I want to use to buff my goblins. By just organizing them as a git mob and actually having the nasty skulkers added so I can use the git mob, I can actually get some benefit that way automatically. And so I have to really think about that, because I think maybe I wasn't wrong to actually put everything into the troops the first time like that, but in some ways I may have overdone it a little bit. I may need to be achieving a bit more of a balance in the way I use those supportive abilities and not just trying to make the anvil into a hammer when it really is an anvil. So the other thing is, I already mentioned, is another takeaway is just how good the wolves are. I didn't expect that at all. That was kind of a really cool discovery, I should say. And even their movement too, which is great. So that was actually really good. And so having those 30 plus, 35, 33 wolves that I painted up was actually a really good thing, now that I think of it. I mean, they are actually a really good unit. The other thing was the giants. I thought they were extremely effective. The one giant that I had, and I likely, as I talked about in the beginning, will be having some lists that incorporate one or more giants with the goblins. I actually think that they're a really nice thing to have to create some threat and some punch with the army. I like the trolls. They were interesting. I didn't really have a chance to look too much at the sheet that has the information on the trolls. My opponent was very familiar with them because I borrowed his. I do need to look into them more. I am considering using my actual giant models I'm considering switching and using some actual GW giants, 4 giants, and using my Ralport the giants as trolls, because they're about the same size. I think that might be kind of neat to be able to still use those models, and for that purpose. But I'm also considering, like I always have, and adding some. I call them black orcs, but I think they're the storm. They're the something. Not the something claw orcs, but they're the old black orcs are used for another faction now that have their own faction in AOS. But I'm thinking of adding some of them just as a part of it, as an ally or something. Just because I like the models, and they would be kind of like an elite melee unit that I could have in there, alongside all of my main goblin force. I really enjoyed using the war boss goblin on a wolf. He ended up slaying a hero of my opponent's, and it's funny because if I had the Git mob in play, then a rule would have been enacted that basically said, like, you know, we're the best or something like that, and it gives the whole, I think it's either the bravery or something increases in the whole army when they see their war boss kill another hero, and I thought it would be pretty rare to ever see it happen, but it actually happened. My war boss did end up slaying a hero on his wolf, and that was pretty cool. It was kind of neat. So yeah, you know, really was a fun game. I'm not really using this videos to compare it to other fantasy games. I am planning on using my goblins for things like Old Warhammer Fantasy and Dragon Rampant as well. So the square bases will be good for that reason. Yeah, so I think that's it. I hope everybody's having a good week, and I basically am going to continue to plot away at my Flemish mercenaries and my Snotling pump wagon for Age of Sigmar. Okay, everybody, take care.